Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today around assessing peer education efforts. I'm Cindy Clowner with the Higher Education Center, and we're pleased to have all of you today, as well as our presenters coming from two institutions that will talk a little bit about how we can assess peer education efforts, both from a different lens. Before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping things that I'd like to go over with everyone. We'll be accepting your questions and posing them to our presenters today. If you have a question, I encourage you to enter that into the question box on the right-hand side of your control panel. At the end of the presentation, our presenters will be hearing your questions and answering them, at least until we have run out of time today. So if you have questions, I encourage you to get those into us as they come to you. Additionally, I want to talk a little bit about our membership benefits that are available through the Higher Education Center. So I encourage you to learn more about the resources that we have at the center by visiting our website, hecaod.osu.edu. Campus memberships include unlimited access to our Screen You suite of tools, which is a web-based screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment tool, as well as access to our past and current learning collaboratives, one of which that we just wrapped up last fall is focused on engaging peers across the substance misuse continuum. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that at the very end of our webinar. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our panel of presenters today coming from two institutions, the University of Alabama and Michigan State University. We have Charlotte Petonic and Brittney Vigna from the University of Alabama, and Dr. Matthew Wawrzynski and Jacob Lemon from Michigan State. So we'll get kicked off with our folks from the University of Alabama, and I'm going to go ahead and pass the torch to you.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Brittney Vigna. Like Cindy said, can you hear?
You got to next it.
Oh, sorry. We're webinar newbies, so we're trying to, hit it the right way. Click over. Oh, man. Giving you all the secrets. We can't do this. I'm very sorry. We're going to figure it out. But while Charlotte gets this going, my name is Brittney Vigna. I'm from the University of Alabama, and I serve as the assistant director. I'll let Charlotte introduce herself now as well.
I'm Charlotte Petonic, and I also serve as an assistant director. And Brittney and I co-advise our peer health education group on campus, which we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so just to get started, just going to run over some quick presentation goals. So during this presentation, this webinar, we're going to be explaining the self-sustainable peer education program that we supervise. It's called Project Health. We have about 160 interns, so we're going to be explaining that structure, as well as the learning outcomes that we use to evaluate our peer education programs and some of the just different things that go into creating an evaluation program for a large-scale peer education program. So just to kind of get started, we have Project Health and Gamma. We generally just go by Project Health, but we did have Gamma, which is commonly known as Greeks Advocating the Mature Management of Alcohol. We changed it up to be our own, so where Gamma just doesn't solely focus on alcohol. They focus on pretty much all topics that encompass health and well-being, but we just call them Project Health for short. So they consist of about 160 undergraduate peer educators. So it's a very large scale program. Each intern is volunteer based, and they work about 5 hours volunteer every single week. That's kind of the breakdown of how their demographics look. It says on the bottom right-hand corner that is Greek affiliated. That's supposed to say in-state, out-of-state. A majority of the students at the University of Alabama are out-of-state, and so that also reflects in our peer education program that we have a lot of students who are out-of-state as well. Then also a lot of our students, a majority of them, plan to attend post-secondary school. And then we also have a very large Greek population on our campus. So we have a majority of our members are going to be in a Greek affiliated organization. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are in Gamma. They are spread out amongst the other different groups that we have as well. So can I just look at the way that our structure looks? We have a very, I would say, for lack of a better term, intense structure. Since we have 160 undergraduates, we have to have a lot of leadership positions to ensure that everything is functioning in the best way possible. So the way that Project Health and Gamma is structured is that we split it into 4 distinct branches. So if you look under the directors tab, which is the second from the left, you'll see that there's Gamma, ambassadors, advocates, and HUT. So we have 4 of those, each of those 4 different branches, and so they have a different kind of outreach. So HUT, for example, is our most prominent branch because it is just the most visible on campus. It's out on campus the most a week. So it's on campus about 40 hours each week. It's a large PVC pipe structure that is pretty common now in all different health promotion programs across the country. They're just really eye-catching and people feel really comfortable going up to them. And I think they're probably like semi-intrigued. So they're like, what is the structure? I'm going to go find out what it is. So they have no problem going up to it. As a whole, the organization, so the whole student organization is on campus for about 60 hours each week total. Our advocates, they focus on a form of interaction that we call informal interactions, and they quite literally just go up to people and have conversations with them about health. It's kind of awkward at first, but they get really, really good at approaching random strangers and having conversation. And then also there is like quite a bit of, there can be not quite a bit, but there sometimes they get like shut down because people are like, I don't want to talk about health, but they've gotten really good at managing those different interactions. Our ambassadors are similar to Gamma in that they do classroom presentations and they also do organizational presentations, but then they are also responsible for an initiative that we call Healthy Hump Day. It is in the Ferguson Center, which is our student center, on every Wednesday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then Gamma is our Greek peer education group. They're similar to ambassadors, but they strictly present in Greek chapter houses. Then we have all these different leadership positions to ensure that the organization is running smoothly. We have recruitment, we have quality improvement, we have director of the Greek programs, we have external programs. And so we use all of those different roles that we have to ensure that everything is running smoothly. So what we do is we have a multifaceted approach to outreach. Like I said, that our students are on campus about 60 hours each week, and they're able to reach approximately 30,000 students per semester. It's about 30. So actually the terminology would be 30. We had 30,000 unique interactions each semester. Or per semester. It's actually 30,000 unique interactions per year. Excuse me, that's supposed to say per year. That's why I was like, why? That is a lot of human life. All of our interactions incorporate active participation. So it isn't just an interaction where it's like, okay, here's a handout and then you're done. There is multiple phases of interaction that they go through in each interaction. The way that this little chart is split out is that each group is going to, so within Health Hut, Health Ambassadors, Health Advocate, and Gamma, they're all going to talk about a different subtopic within a main health topic. So if the topic is campus resources, Health Hut's going to be talking about campus safety, advocates will be talking about academic resources, and then we break it down that way. Just because we are a college campus, there's limited space. So we want to make sure that if they're being approached by different groups, that they're still getting new information surrounding the same topic. But the ways that they can receive the information is verbally, through a handout, or through a game or activity, because each interaction has a game or activity. And then obviously we always incentivize it because we are not beyond bribing. It is what it is. And that really gets them in because we make sure that all of our promo items that we hand out are like extremely cool. So we actually really pride ourselves on our promo items. But moving into our evaluation process. So a couple of years ago, Charlotte and I, when we were kind of like revising everything how we're doing and making sure that we're using this program to the best of its ability, since it is so large scale, that we really worked on the evaluation process to ensure that the peer educators were not only being effective, but that students were able to understand the information. And we've definitely expanded it throughout the years. Every year we try and do something a little bit more to make sure that we are constantly growing. But the key components of our evaluation process are comprehensive training. So we use learning outcomes as the basis for evaluating our interactions. So every student, every branch, there's five there's 4 to 5 different health topic coordinators that are responsible for the creation of health topic materials. So every week for every branch, there will be 3 learning outcomes that are used to evaluate whether the students are able to understand the information, and it's also used to drive the information that they're creating. So the learning outcomes are developed in advance, and so then the handouts, any talking points, etc., is all created through those learning outcomes. And so we do comprehensive training on that. It's a lot of training. Our students at the beginning of every semester go through about 20 hours of training, and then we do training every single Sunday night. We make sure that they have a complete understanding of the necessity for evaluation, and then also, just like disclaimer, making sure that they know that it's trying to understand if our students are able to understand the information. Like, we're not necessarily trying to assess if they're doing their job or not. It's really trying to learn more about the students. Like, I mean, obviously, if there's something that's completely wrong in the evaluation, everything's like really, really low, we're going to check into that. But if they missed one learning outcome each week, it's like, okay, maybe the information was a little bit too difficult for them, but we use that information, or maybe they need more information on this because it's not a topic that everybody understands. But that's how we use that evaluation. And then looking into the logistics to making sure that evaluation tools are in place each week. So we use iPads for our evaluation. We use Qualtrics very, very heavily. We have a humongous Qualtrics form that Charlotte and our graduate assistant are really, really good at managing. But it is used to make sure that, so all of our learning outcomes are put in there. And so we are able to, they just use the iPad to pretty much track people's answers. And then that information gets delivered to us. But that does require some logistics, like making sure they are in a place where they're not going to get stolen, or making sure that they're charged, and just like little things like that. Also Wi-Fi. And then incorporating the learning outcomes. So the way that we incorporate our learning outcomes into our outreach materials. So for each branch within the entire organization, HUT, Ambassadors, Advocates, Gamma, they all create learning outcomes, like I had mentioned previously. And so the learning outcomes come first to make sure that they know that the materials they are creating are driving to the learning outcomes. So your talking points should address the learning outcomes. Your handouts should supplement that information to drive to the learning outcomes. Your game or activity is going to have to incorporate questions to answer the learning outcomes. So we make sure that all of that information, they're all intertwined, and all of that information is designed to deliver to the student so that they're meeting the learning outcomes. Every week, what goes out is for each branch, there will be two different handouts, a quarter sheet and a half sheet, 2 pages of talking points, a game or activity, and then game or activity questions. So those go out every single week for each branch. It's a lot of approval, but it's worth it. And we'll talk about the developmental process next. So when we're developing all of these different materials, the peer education team, so each branch is going to have 4 to 5 peer education health topic teams. So that team is going to create the learning outcomes based on the topics assigned. We assign them the topics just because there's 160 humans in this organization, and if it was like, okay, free reign on deciding topics, it would be all over the place. So it's easier for us to just really decide the main topics and to ensure that they're learning new information regularly, and it isn't just like, okay, let's talk about alcohol and that's it. Like, we go into like pretty intense stuff. Like, we'll talk about, we try and just make sure that it's going to be something that is up and coming, or it's based in research now, or things that are on the horizon for health education. And so we really try to incorporate all those different materials, because this program is not only educational for other students, it's a retention program for our own students. But the peer education teams create those learning outcomes based on the topics assigned, and then we approve the learning outcomes. So we have to make sure that we're looking at them. We use the SMART goal format. So we try and make sure that all of those learning outcomes are meeting that SMART goal format. And then outreach materials are developed by the original health topic team after the learning outcomes are approved. And then it goes through a whole approval process for each of those different materials. And so one would be directly to their branch director. Then we have a vice president of outreach who approves them after the branch director, and then they send it to the advisor. So Charlotte or myself, usually it is Charlotte, and so she approves all of them to make sure that, you know, the information is consistent, it's factually accurate, and that everything is worded in a way that would be understandable. So we really look at the big picture things. By the time they get to us, they're pretty much good to go. And then game questions are used during interactions to assess that the learning outcomes are being met. So if there is a learning outcome that they have, they are going to try and they will use those game questions that they're using in the interaction to assess after the whole interaction has occurred. So after they've heard the information verbally and they've also received it through a handout, and then they're interacting with it during the game, they use the game questions to assess that the learning outcome is being met. And then so we make sure to then we take all that information and compile it into a graphical representation and then deliver it to the administration within our campus. So next, Charlotte is going to talk more about how we utilize Qualtrics and some of the results of our evaluation, as well as the strengths and weaknesses of the program.
Hello. So our learning outcome data, as Brittney had said, is an assessment of our peer education's interactions with individual students. We use iPads to input them directly from the students as they're out doing their interactions live. So we do have live data that we're able to get as students are out and about doing their interactions. We found that we have to have some backup paper tally sheets and paper forms because occasionally technology issues happen across campus. But Qualtrics has been what we've used, and we link it on our iPads as a little icon so they can just keep redoing it. And this also allows for attendance for our students so that they're putting their campus-wide ID numbers in to show that they're there for their shift. And then it also shows who's taking responsibility for the iPad because they are expensive and sometimes they do get misplaced. So that's great. The next slide we're looking at is just a basic of what health topics that a branch is covered. So fall 2016, our health ambassadors covered the following topics. All of the green showed that they were learning outcomes that were passed. So we could see that there were 3 learning outcomes that we did not meet in those variety of different topics of barrier methods, body image, and sustainability. So we can go back and look at those individual learning outcomes to see if there is a specific thing that our students didn't understand. And we can either look to see, was it our students and our messaging that was not educating our peers across campus, or is this something that we can do more education on to make sure our students across campus know about each different topic? So for some of the strengths and weaknesses, we used to have a lot more interactions on campus before we started our learning outcome process. So while we were reaching more people, they weren't really quality interactions. When we got here to UA, they were just assessing whether or not students got handouts or they got the button, but they weren't assessing whether or not the student was actually receiving the information and whether or not they were learning anything from it. So we are having more quality interactions, but we are seeing a little bit of a drop in the number of people that we're seeing because the interactions are taking 2 to 4 minutes on average. We're able to assess what topics we need to spend more time on based on what learning outcomes we're meeting, and it's been able to show us consistency across the board for all of our different branches. Our weaknesses can be logistics and the difficulty of technology failures. There are certain locations on campus we find that the Wi-Fi doesn't work. We have to be really intentional about when and where we're charging the iPads because we have 2 days, Mondays and Tuesdays, where one of our groups is out from 9:30 in the morning until 10 p.m. at night. So the consistent use, we have to have them charged at some place. And then financial backing can be a large component. We were really grateful to be sponsored by our university's assessment and planning division about 1.5 to 2 years ago. Our quality enhancement plan through SACS is on experiential learning, and we were awarded a project through them for our peer education and outreach, and they provided us with some funds for the initial iPads to be used, and we worked with them for showing experiential learning through our peer education program. Alternatives for replication, Google Forms can be a really great thing, and if you don't have access to Qualtrics, you could also share that through Google, which is great. You could always do paper tallying instead of iPads and input the data later. And then we've also found that, especially with our advocates who are the informal groups who just walk up to people on campus, we just don't have the funds to do an iPad for every group that goes out. So we create a link and we email it to them, and then they save it on their phones, and then they input their data on their phone after every interaction that they do. So there are some alternatives for replication and other things that can be looked at. For our internal evaluation for our peers and our peer educators, we do internal assessment, and we look at their ability to explain their role as peer educators. We think it's really important that being a peer educator helps them in life goals, careers, etc., and with their behaviors and perceptions, and as their role as a peer educator on their choices that they make outside of the organization. So we do extensive surveying and evaluation of how being a peer educator has affected them.
Yeah, so one of the things that we have found, this is Brittney again, one of the things that we had found was for their ability to explain their role. Just from talking to our students before we started conducting this evaluation, if they were to describe themselves on how to describe themselves as a peer educator, then they were actually really uncomfortable trying to figure out how to describe what they did. Sometimes they'd be like, I work at the health hut, or they would say like, I talk to students about sex, like just completely basic things that really don't describe what they really do on campus, since they are making such an and we also found it really interesting that they could describe how their role in certain situations better. So what we had found is that 80% of them felt really comfortable explaining their role to their family and friends, but they weren't so comfortable explaining it in a job interview, which is when they really needed to be able to explain to that. And then just a sidebar from that, we do resume consultations with them. It's a benefit that we offer as for their participation in the program, essentially. And whenever I'll look at their resumes, I'll ask them, like, they have to describe their role for their bullet points on their resume, but they weren't necessarily super great at describing their role in a professional setting. So that helped us because we could now train them in different ways so that they are able to describe their role as a peer educator. But we did think it was extremely interesting how they felt comfortable explaining what they did to their friends and their family, but if they needed to explain it to a professor or in a job interview, that was something that a majority of them it's kind of just all over the board of how comfortable they felt. And then we also really want to know how their role as a peer educator affects their decision making. So these are just a couple of the different categories that we wanted to assess. There's a whole bunch that we did, and it's available in our annual report. But for example, on the consumption of alcohol. So does their role as a peer educator, because we really heavily emphasize that when you're a peer educator, you're not only a peer educator during the day when you're at your shift, but you're a peer educator consistently. So does that role that you have and does the information that you learn, does that actually impact you? Because if you're the person that you are educating other students and trying to influence them, but is your work even really influencing you? And because that would definitely be a different training component for us as supervisors down to them as peer educators. So this is what we had found on the consumption of alcohol. 32% said it always had influenced, and then 43% said it usually influenced, which is still a majority of the organization. And it was same for prioritizing responsibilities. There were some areas across there that it didn't necessarily impact them as much as we would have liked, but those are also just different areas, and it's really probably different on each campus. But those were areas that we could explain to them or try and provide training on them to how to work that into their daily activities.
Lastly, the use of a lot of our Qualtrics programs have increased the accountability of our students. Before, we found that our peers didn't want to tell us if someone was constantly late for their shift or was a no-show. So we were able to build in an attendance part of our Qualtrics form where each student has to enter in their campus-wide ID, and that is time-stamped in Qualtrics. So we know what time they're getting there, and hopefully they're not giving their campus-wide ID to anyone else. So we were able to do that. We're also able to show who's taking responsibility for the iPads. As we said, they've been misplaced several times on campus, and that causes a lot of stress. We can do Find My iPad so many times, but usually they get misplaced and put in a safe on campus someplace, and that doesn't work when it's in a safe. We're also able to track the number of participants reached per shift. So we're able to tell if we're in a location that's dead from 3 to 5, maybe we should move locations or think about something else. And then we're also able to track the success of the shifts and their interactions by assessing their learning outcomes. So we do have someone that is dedicated to stopping by every shift at least once throughout the semester and observing their interactions, and then they get feedback on their outreach skills, how they talk and interact with others, and how they might be able to reach students more effectively, and we found that that's really been successful. And now we're going to turn it over to Matt and Jake.
Thank you, Brittney and Charlotte. Let me see as if I take control. Okay, so I just want to acknowledge the fact that the University of Alabama, I think, is really an exemplar in some of the assessment that they're trying to do and the evaluations that they're trying to do to try to really understand learning outcomes that peers are getting as a result of interactions with peer educators or the presentations that their peer educators are putting on. We have taken things in a completely different direction, not in a bad way, but I was a student affairs administrator for a number of years before I became a faculty member, and I've been a faculty member actually now longer than I was a student affairs administrator. And one of the things in my role as a student affairs administrator is that I had a peer education group, and I, as well as others, really believed in this whole power of peer education, that the role that peer educators play can have a significant influence on outcomes of peers. And one of the things that we really didn't know a lot, though, at that time, and we're starting to uncover more as we do this study, is to try to understand the outcomes and the benefits that peer educators derive from being peer educators. So I've been the director of the National Peer Educator Study since 2004. So I'm going to stop there for a minute and let Jake go ahead and introduce himself.
Okay. I'm Jake Lemon. I am a PhD student at MSU, and I've had the great opportunity of, as my graduate assistantship, serving as the project manager for the National Peer Educator Study. And I administer the survey that goes out to students, and I oversee the team that collects the data, and we analyze the data, and we create a national report, and then for the participating institutions, we create institutional reports.
So in 2004, the Bacchus Peer Education Network, now the Bacchus Initiatives of NASPA, asked if I would direct this national project exploring peer education. So we launched the National Peer Educator Study actually in 2005 and have been consistently surveying students on college and university campuses around the U.S. and more recently across the United States. So we have about 600 to 700 peer educators who participate in the survey annually. There's over 400 colleges that have participated in the study, of which about 50 to 70 institutions participate annually. And in fact, this year we've had a spike that's actually even much higher than the 70 mark. So the great things about the working with the NPES is that I work with a very talented group of master's and doctoral students at Michigan State University that help us to put on the NPES and work directly with Jake to help analyze and to provide institutional reports. As part of our study and as part of the NPES project, there are roughly 3 goals that we have. We try to provide institutional reports back to advisors of peer educators who participate. So we aggregate the data and we provide that information back to the advisors. We try to provide information about their specific peer educators. We also try to provide a national benchmark so that peer educators can, or so that advisors can see how their peer educators are in line, or if there's some things that they might be thinking about differently in relation to a national benchmark. But then also we gather similar types of institutions so that, again, peer educators in an aggregate form, their responses are reported back to advisors. So advisors have kind of a snapshot of their institution, a national average, as well as aspirational or similar peers. And then we try to provide advisors some recommendations or tips. So if there is a particular learning domain, and Jake will talk a little about the learning domains in a little bit, that they see maybe a little bit lower score, that they are able to maybe think about some things that they could potentially do to work with their peer educators to increase some of the learning outcomes specifically for their peer educators. The NPES was developed from a conceptual framework primarily looking at Learning Reconsidered 2, the Council for the Advancement in Bloom's Taxonomy. So although we've established validity and reliability for the survey, for the purposes of the webinar, it's not as important to talk about that, but what's most important is to talk about how we maybe have thought about the development of the survey and how we've modified it over the years and have utilized this conceptual framework. So if you're familiar with Learning Reconsidered or Learning Reconsidered 2, the CAS standards and Bloom's taxonomy, we use Bloom's to explore cognitive outcomes. So really at the heart of the framework are these 6 learning domains that overlap, again, Learning Reconsidered 1, Learning Reconsidered 2, and the CAS learning domains. And Jake's going to talk a little about those in a couple of minutes. In addition to learning outcomes and domains, we also explore motivation for becoming a peer educator, training and educational activities that peer educators are involved in, and then also some demographic characteristics. And in collecting these data, one of the things that we're able to see are some of the trends. And this gives a little bit of a snapshot about who peer educators are and some of the changes that we've actually seen over the years that we've been conducting the study. So those who have participated in the survey are relatively consistent over the years by identifying as women, the age that they identify, the class year, and when we think about those 3 characteristics, it seems to reflect the overall peer educators that advisors report to us at college universities. But what we've seen, interestingly, is that more students seem to be living off campus, which may be consistent with being a junior or senior. So we see that 71% of the students who participate are juniors or seniors. We see that more students are now identifying as LGBTQ. We see that there's a large increase in the number of paid peer educators. 5 years ago, roughly 25% of peer educators were paid, whereas now it's about 39%. And we've seen a large increase in the number of students of color. And then one last note is that the average time that a peer educator is in their role has dropped from 13 months down to 12 months, which might mirror that there might be more seniors, juniors or seniors becoming peer educators. One of the things that I just talked about is that the number of students of color who actually are becoming peer educators. If you see the bottom shaded part of this graph, that is made up primarily white students. So you can see that we've seen a decrease in the number of white students, and you'll start to see that the other 4 colored lines at the very top of the graph have increased, where we've started to see more African American students become peer educators. The same can be true for Hispanic or Latinx students and Asian American. We've held roughly the same number of multiracial students across the time that we've been collecting these data, and we've actually seen a decrease in the number of white students. And again, those numbers might actually reflect what we see in higher education, who has access to higher education. When we were exploring intrinsic motivations, experiences with someone I know has seen a recent spike over the last couple of years. So reasons that peers became peer educators, that as a result of experiences with someone that they know, has seen the spike, and we've seen a sharp decline over this same period for those peer educators who say that they have my own individual experiences. So students consistently have reported that these top 3 are the top 3 intrinsic motivators for becoming a peer educator. So the desire to help others, desire to be involved in college, and desire to gain additional knowledge. And those are all probably 3 things that if we were to ask you to brainstorm what you think the top 3 reasons peer educators become peer educators, you probably would come up with those at least in some of our brainstorming. When you look at some of the extrinsic motivators that peer educators report to us, overlook the anomaly presented in some of the 2010 data. So where we see some spikes on the far left-hand part of the graph. So overlook that part, but we see that extrinsic motivators are fairly consistently reported. Interest in gaining job-related skills, need to add something to my resume, and career development exploration.
Yeah, I think with career development and exploration, one of the things that's important to note is that how even though we often recruit students who we feel are intrinsically motivated to do this work, there are instances where extrinsic motivators aid in the retention of those students. So career exploration is one of those areas, and also it goes back to the demographic piece of students. So how are we recruiting and connecting with juniors and seniors that are occupying those types of positions? We recently had a session at a conference where we talked about different career options for students in peer educator roles. And that was something that a lot of them that were intrinsically motivated to do this work were really thinking about.
We were also interested to know peer educators' perceptions about the methods peer educators use to motivate change in peers' behavior. Maybe, not surprisingly, the 4 top areas align with the typical roles peer educators play: role modeling, presenting an educational program, working on awareness campaign, and one-to-one time. Similar to the previous slide, the methods they believe have the greatest impact to motivate change are role modeling, presenting a program, but one-on-one time was slightly higher than working on awareness campaigns.
And another thing that's interesting to point out is that mental health screening and referral is a little bit lower here, considering it to be a salient issue in terms of an issue that's spiked on many college campuses, and kind of one that might underlie some other health and wellness issues on campus. I found that pretty interesting.
Many of you might be familiar that the Bacchus Initiatives of NASPA offers a certified peer educator training program that doesn't necessarily look at content-specific training, but looks at overall peer helper skills. So we saw that out of the people who have completed this study, a little over 41% are CPE certified. You'll also see that some of the top training topics that are reported, and we're going to talk a little about some of those top training areas. Another consistent finding is that 56 total hours of training, so anywhere between 50 to 60 are reported, and that equates to roughly 28 hours per semester of training that peer educators receive. Trends in training seem to align with what we are seeing in headlines in the Chronicle of Higher Education or Inside Higher Ed.
So a lot of these topics, as you can see, the percentage of students who are trained on these topics has increased in every single topic pointed out in this slide. And if you look across topics such as sexual assault, relationship violence, bystander intervention, mental health awareness, these are all topics that are being trained either in the very high 80% or the 90%. And these are issues that, again, seem to be salient issues of concern on our campuses, and I think that's pretty consistent to what we see currently. Another thing, looking at the top methods of education, so another thing that we do in terms of training topics is whether or not students are receiving the training, but also the top methods of education. So if you look at three of the methods of education that we look at is presented an educational program, and we can see that three main topics are all similar. So alcohol, drug use prevention, sexual assault prevention, and mental health awareness. And this kind of mirrors the high percentage of students that are trained in these topics. So it's nice to know that of the students that are trained that these peer educators are utilizing methods of education.
Jake, I apologize for interrupting you. I think there's a sound issue that there's some feedback or some muffling that's happening with the sound on your end. So we just want to make sure everyone's hearing all the things that you're sharing.
Yeah. Is this better?
I think so. Say that one more.
Is this better audio?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's all right. So I'll kind of recap. So talking about the top methods of education, we can see that they're all around the same topics. So alcohol use prevention, sexual assault prevention, mental health awareness. And these kind of mirror some of the topics of training that students are receiving that are among the higher percentage of students that are trained in those topics. So we see it's nice to see that students that are being trained in these areas are utilizing them. And then moving on to the next slide. So with this slide, I tried to create a visual representation of looking at the training received versus the methods that are being used. So of the students that are being trained in this particular topic, what is the percentage that they're actually using this to talk or have a conversation with another student, hand out information on that topic, or present a program on that topic? So what's interesting about this is that in previous years, we saw that peer educators were sometimes having conversations with peers, but they weren't actually receiving training, the same amount of training on that topic. So maybe the talking with somebody would be at 62%, but only 40% of students were being trained on that topic. So actually the trend that we've noticed most recently over the past 5 years is that we're actually seeing where a high number of students are being trained, but not the same percentage of students are actually utilizing the methods. Now that's not all bad. So if you look at a topic like alcohol use, there's still 65% of those students that are talking with peers about that, and 53% handing out information. I think it's just interesting to point out that there's a little bit of discrepancy there. So going back to Matt's conversation earlier about the 6 learning domains developed from the CAS standards, Learning Reconsidered, this is an area of the survey that tracks student learning, and we track students. We have them reply to learning outcomes questions as both before they were a peer educator and as a result of being a peer educator. So we found that among and across all of the 6 learning domains that we track, that students generally report that they have higher learning domains, or they're improving and gaining skills in these learning domains as a result of being peer educators. So we'll start with cognitive complexity, which is the ability to critically analyze situations, summarize ideas, and apply effective reasoning to solve problems. So we see peer educators engage, reflect, and apply knowledge about wellness to manage conflicts constructively and engage others in healthy behaviors. So you can see that some of the areas and some of the questions that we ask are developing solutions to problems or applying theories and concepts to practical problems. Next is interpersonal development. So that's the capacity to develop meaningful relationships and understand the importance of collaboration to achieve a goal. So we see peer educators often work with students who are different from themselves, establishing trust and empathy in order to make meaningful connections regarding health and wellness. And in this area, we see peer educators, as a result of being a peer educator, growing in this area. And then I think we were talking about intrapersonal last time, but okay, so like I said, can you go back? Okay, so intrapersonal development we see as the ability to reflect on achievement, identity, and goals with self-awareness and realistic self-appraisal. So peer educators are learning more about who they are as individuals and exploring their values as related to healthy decision-making. And I already covered interpersonal development, which is more about effectively communicating with others and managing conflict with others. So we see that in peer educator roles, they're gaining in these skills as well. So practical competence is the ability to apply knowledge and skills gained through experience to inform personal wellness and professional success. Peer educators are goal-oriented learners and purposeful life skills managers who often become socially responsible citizens. So some of the questions that we're asking students are their ability to develop long-range goals, engage in effective listening, have a sense of purpose, and we've noticed that as a result of being a peer educator, that peer educators students are gaining in this learning domain. So knowledge acquisition, construction, integration, and application is the ability to develop intellectual and practical skills by connecting together knowledge, ideas, and experiences. And we've also noticed that students in this area are growing in terms of being able to have knowledge about campus resources, having knowledge about general health issues, and evaluating information, arguments, or methods. And last, humanitarianism and civic engagement tracks the ability to participate in civically and promote knowledge, skills, and values and motivations that shape a community's future. Peer educators understand the importance of supporting a diverse and inclusive community. They consider the welfare of others when making decisions, role modeling, and planning educational programming. So we've seen that as a result of being a peer educator, students are feeling responsible to help improve their campus community. They're feeling a part of the campus community. And then one of the another area that the National Peer Educator Survey tracks are social networks. So when thinking about peer educators and their spheres of influence on campus, we see that they're involved all across campus in other different groups and activities. So some of the ones that we've noted where have the highest percentage of peer educators participating in are student clubs and orgs at 83%, community service groups at 45%, programming organizations at 34%, and housing and residence life at 27%. So, and then kind of based on some of the trends that we've noticed and some of the data that we've collected, some of the recommendations for advisors would practically be in 4 areas. So learning outcomes, understanding the skills that students are learning and the work that they're doing as peer educators, and really adapting and strategically adapting program to continue to strengthen these skill sets. In programming, it's, again, understanding where your peer educators' spheres of influence lie. So what other organizations are they involved on campus, and how does that influence their ability to reach out to other students? Recruitment, so emphasizing transferable skills that students can gain from being a peer educator. So sometimes that is extrinsic motivators such as career preparation for upper class students, juniors and seniors. In other cases, it's leveraging the intrinsic benefits of being a peer educator. And then finally, for training, so it's aligning training curriculum with topics that peer educators are engaging with students. So kind of matching those education methods with where you're training them. So I know we've covered over many different areas of the NPES. If you are interested in participating in the NPES in future years, or you have further questions about some of the data that we've explored, and please contact us. So we can be emailed at npes@naspa.org.
Okay, well, thank you very much to all of our presenters today. Jacob is right that now is the time to ask your questions. So if you have any, I encourage you to enter them into the question box on your control panel on the right-hand side. We do have a couple of questions that'll be coming in. To start, we've had a couple questions regarding how you can get a copy of the presentation. We just wanted to let you all know that this presentation has been recorded. It will be posted on our website, and a PDF of the slides will be available as well in handout form for you to reference. While we're waiting on questions, I want to make a couple of quick announcements about programs that are available through the Higher Education Center. One is around our Engaging Peers Learning Collaborative. Learning collaboratives are a series of web-based trainings around a specific topic. This learning collaborative took place live this past fall, but all 6 sessions from the learning collaborative have been recorded and archived on our member portal, and they look at how we can engage peers in our work to address collegiate substance misuse across the continuum. So looking at health promotion and prevention efforts, as well as intervention and collegiate recovery efforts. You can learn more about this learning collaborative and all of our learning collaboratives by visiting go.osu.edu/HECAODLC. I also wanted to let you know about our free February webinar that's coming up on February 20th at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. This will look at the college prescription drug study that is held here at Ohio State. It's head up by our Center for the Study of Student Life, but it is a multi-institutional study, so they'll be reviewing data and how you can apply that data to your practice. And so we do have a couple of questions. This first one is for Charlotte and Brittney. To the two of you, are the teams creating learning objectives for the topics every single week and semester, or are you reusing the learning objectives each semester and year once they are created?
Okay, can you hear me? Sorry, it was like muted. So they're actually creating new learning outcomes every semester. We do not recycle topics. If we haven't recycled topics in the last 4 years, so we're thinking of new topics consistently. But they're creating new learning outcomes every single semester, and we do not recycle the learning outcomes. It would be new students are creating it. So if we recycled them, honestly, it would just make it would be easy for them but we're also really focusing on the process of them learning the evaluation. So them creating their own original evaluation, their own original learning outcomes is really an essential piece of them understanding the evaluation.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Jake. Jake, this institution focuses heavily on stress and sleep management based on their NCHA data. However, that didn't come up in your presentation as a topic area. Does that fall under mental health for your study?
Actually, we do look at stress management. I pulled the topics that were receiving the highest amount of training and in terms of the highest amount of methods of education used in terms of percentage of students. But that's something that if you email me, I can send that data. I know that most of the percentages of students being trained, I think it hovers around 60% of students being trained, of peer educators being trained in stress management. But that's an area that we do include.
Great, thank you. For Brittney and Charlotte, do you incentivize students to take the evaluation after an interaction? And how do you handle students who are just passing by very quickly and want a snippet of information, but may not have enough time to have a more meaningful engagement?
Yeah, so we provide, we incentivize them through program items. They're not anything like super crazy. It'll be like this week we're giving out little things of tissues. Sometimes we do rowdy things. We'll give out t-shirts a couple times a semester if we're able. And then we have we do a different giveaway every single week. And so that is the main incentive for students to stop by. But the interactions honestly don't take very long. They're generally like maximum is going to be 4 minutes long. But for students who don't have as much time, they have to complete the entire interaction to get the prize. So they have to complete the activity. So basically it's like we get your evaluation and then you can have a prize. But if they don't want to do the entire interaction, they can always just take a handout. So the way that we make sure that our students are bringing in people to their different tabling opportunities or to their interaction is they are responsible for physically bringing people in. So if people are like walking by, we all know students and they are so funny and think that, when they fake talk on their phone, nobody knows what's happening. Like obviously we know what's going down, but so we encourage them to physically be in front of the table. So it's removing that barrier of, okay, the person who's behind the table is the person in power. We have people who are in front of the table who are walking up to humans and saying like, hey, do you want to come learn about this topic that we're talking about today? And that's how we bring them in. But it doesn't generally take long. And we do have our, regulars who come every single time, seek out the hut because they know they're going to get some cool stuff.
Great. This is our last question, and it is for Jake and Matt. Is there a cost associated with participating in the National Peer Education Study?
Not as long as there's the institution is a member of NASPA, the National Association of Student Personnel Administrators, and then that as long as they're affiliated with the Bacchus Initiatives, which doesn't cost anything to join either. So we generate a list from NASPA that has folks affiliated with them, and that's how we start to solicit people to participate in the study.
Great. Well, I just want to thank again our presenters today. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise in this area and providing a couple of different viewpoints around how we can assess and evaluate peer education efforts. I also want to put a plug in for our upcoming conference, the National Meeting, which is taking place July 29th through August 1st. The call for proposals is open now, so we'd love to see your submissions about the projects that you're doing on your campus and how those are being implemented. You can learn learn more about our call for proposals by visiting go.osu.edu/nmproposals, and that's a capital NM, as that link is case sensitive. Again, thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you all in February for our free webinar on the college prescription drug study.